There are 63 million family caregivers in the United States right now. 59 million of them are experiencing burnout on a regular basis. This is not a statistic about a few exhausted people. That is almost an entire caregiving population running on empty, and most of them don't know there's another way. My guest today has spent more than 28 years in the senior care industry, and she has built an entire company around the thing I most needed when I was deep in it: a plan, a neutral voice in the room, and someone who could see the whole picture when I was too tired to see past Tuesday. Annalee Kruger is the founder and CEO of Caregiver Incorporated, a national elder care consulting firm. She grew up watching her own parents become caregivers, and she has spent her career making sure that other families don't go in blind. Welcome to From Guilt to Good. I cared for my mother for decades, and for most of that time, I did not have a plan. I had love, I had determination, and as I grew up and her health deteriorated, I had a lot of nights where I figured things out in real time because nobody handed me a caregiving roadmap. Nobody sat me down and said, this is going to be hard, here's what's coming, here's how you prepare, and here's how to make sure you don't disappear in the process. And so I did disappear for a long time. There are 63 million family caregivers in the United States right now. 59 million of them are experiencing burnout on a regular basis. This is not a statistic about a few exhausted people. That is almost an entire caregiving population running on empty, and most of them don't know there's another way. But today's guest does. Hi, my name is Jeanette Yates. I'm the founder of The Self-Caregiver, and I cared for my own mother for several decades, and now I help caregivers set boundaries and use simple tools that make care and life easier so they can feel good, not guilty. My guest today has spent more than 28 years in the senior care industry, and she has built an entire company around the thing I most needed when I was deep in it: a plan. A neutral voice in the room, and someone who could see the whole picture when I was too tired to see past Tuesday. Annalee Kruger is the founder and CEO of Caregiver Incorporated, a national elder care consulting firm. She is a sought-after speaker, corporate trainer, a podcast host, and the author of The Invisible Patient, a book for family caregivers that is packed with tools, scripts, and honest guidance for every stage of the journey. She grew up watching her own parents become caregivers, and she has spent her career making sure that other families don't go in blind. Annalee, welcome to From Guilt to Good.
Thank you. Thank you. I am so happy to be here, Jeanette.
I know we were talking about how before we hit record, we're both in Florida, so our hair's frizzy, we're getting sweaty already, but we're going to lock into this episode right now. I always start here in the podcast because I believe the best guides are always the ones who have walked the road themselves in some way. And so I have a feeling yours started earlier or differently than most people would expect. You grew up in a multi-generational household, watching your parents become caregivers to your grandparents. What did that look like, and what did it plant inside you?
So it looked interesting in that, granted, this is in the 70s. I'm 54. So back in the 70s, we didn't have home care. We didn't have assisted living. We didn't have all of that. So back then, seniors' options were fail and die at home, move in with their adult kids, or move into a nursing home, because those were their three options. So it was just interesting to watch. Like, my mom's mom moved in with us first, and she just needed help. She needed help with all of her activities of daily living. She had severe osteoporosis. And so it was just interesting to see like how the family dynamics changed as my grandmother's needs increased, and as depression became more apparent because she was in chronic pain, because she was afraid to take pain pills, because she didn't want to get addicted, that whole thing. And so it was just interesting to see how my grandmother aged compared to when my dad's dad moved in, because they were both widows. When my dad's dad moved in with us on the farm, he was completely independent with activities of daily living. He was riding the horses with us and riding on the combine, driving the tractor so we could bale hay. I mean, feeding the ducks. Like, he was like very active and engaged. He just needed to be around people. So it was just interesting to see like how the family dynamics, plus we were just brought up that, family takes care of family. That was just kind of the mindset back then. And it was more feasible. because now it takes two people to earn a living, and it just wasn't always that way. At least on the farm, we were always working and stuff, so that was the living. But it was just interesting to see, because what happened is, not long, just a few years after my grandparents moved in, my oldest sister went missing when she was in college. And so it was just interesting to see like how my dad and my brother would spend the weekends driving to Nebraska to try to find my sister. And then my mom and the rest of my siblings and I would run the farm and take care of grandparents. And so it was just interesting to see how like life throws you this major curveball within your own like nuclear family, but you've also committed to taking care of that next generation up.
It sounds like to some extent your family had somewhat of a plan, but was there a time where you realized that it was clear that most families aren't prepared, don't have a plan?
Yeah, then we fast forward into, so in third grade, I knew that I was going to be working with families and caregivers and seniors. I just already knew, because I was watching this whole thing unfold as I'm growing up. I'm just like, wow, this is, I think, my calling. And I was right. So I went into social work and worked as a social worker and admissions director and marketing director, and then eventually as an executive director for 3 years in CCRCs, continuing care retirement communities, those that have independent living all the way down to skilled nursing. Those first came out in the 90s. And so I was like in that first wave of being like the social worker in those. And back then, one person, AKA me, did all the tours, did all the social work for all the different levels of care, and did all the marketing. Nowadays, they have it easier. Now each level of care has their own marketing and social worker person, but that's not how it was. And so what happened, what I saw literally every day for more than 2 decades, was part of my job was always to do the tours. And so every single day for decades, I had adult kids coming into my office. They're just overwhelmed, blindsided. They're coming with this list of pamphlets of all these different care facilities because mom had a stroke. She's the primary caregiver to dad with Alzheimer's. Kids got thrust into caregiving, thrust into decision making, and they were very ill prepared. They would come in just deer in the headlight look, because unless you hang out in long-term care communities, it's pretty daunting, because you're like, wow, what is going on here? There's all these elderly people, they need care, and there's noises and smells and things that are just unfamiliar to people. And so they would come in with all these pamphlets, because the hospital discharge planner would say, here's a list of facilities, go find one by noon tomorrow because we're discharging your loved one. And they had no idea what questions to ask, what to look for. They weren't getting along because they're exhausted. They ended up having to take care of dad. And they're like, wow, I didn't realize he was so demented. Well, no wonder mom had a stroke, right? Because she's not getting any sleep either. And so she's been doing this for a whole long time. And so they didn't know what questions to ask, what to look for. They assumed Medicare or Medicaid were the same program, and that those programs would pay for every single dollar of care needed for both of them. And they did. And they grasped like 2% of what the social workers and hospital teams tell them. They hear, 100 days of Medicare coverage. No, that's only if you qualify. Like there's all these qualifications, right? But they come in like, okay, well, we have 100 days to figure out what we're going to do. And I'm like, no, that's not how that works at all. So I was spending all of this time during the tour educating families about dementia. I have yet, even to this day, worked with a family who actually understands dementia progression, and it makes sense because they're in uncharted territory. They don't know what they don't know, and it's hard to like be realistic and look at what's going on with a loved one. And so when I would ask them, and they also didn't understand why they now are so angry and resentful of their care recipient. Well, because they're burned out, right? Got thrust into it, And so when I would ask the kids, do your parents have a living will, power of attorney? Is your dad a veteran? Is there long-term care insurance? They're always like, I don't know. It never occurred to us to talk about these things. But then there were like this many adult kids who would say, Annalee, I saw the writing on the wall with mom and dad, and, dad's had dementia or Parkinson's diagnosis for 6 years, and we wanted to try to get ahead of this. But mom and dad gave us so much pushback that we quit trying to have, to get all of this information. And here we are yet again in crisis. So that's how Care Right got birthed.
That was going to be my next question. That was the gap that you were trying to fill with Care Right, which started in 2011. So you saw these two big things. One, there was either no plan, or if the parents had made a plan, the kids didn't know about it. So essentially, if nobody knows about the plan, there's not a plan. And then the other thing was well, we wanted to have a plan, but it was just too hard to talk about. Is that what you're?
Yes. Yes. Well, and I was going to get fired too because I was exceeding the minutes per patient per day because by then it was all more about profit, right? And so I was going to get fired. I'd already been written up twice for spending too much time with the families. My directive was get them in and get them out. And I was like, okay, this is clearly not a fit for me anymore. So I started Care Right in 2011 to solve for all those things I just told you about that were problematic for families that get thrust into caregiving and thrust into decision making and thrust into going like, what is a power of attorney and who does those? Like, what is that?
Well, and for each one of those things, like you mentioned with the 100 days, right? There's the short answer, like, oh, you need a power of attorney. But some people think what power of attorney does and means there's different kinds. It doesn't work all the way, always like you think it does. The 100 days isn't really 100 days. Long-term care insurance isn't always like there's so many things underneath every single one of those.
So many nuances.
Yes.
Every single category. And that's why I'm a family caregiver consultant, because there's so many nuances that families just don't know. They don't know what they don't know. And then they make really expensive mistakes because they're misinformed or they're making decisions off of assumptions or what neighbor Joe said. He went through it with his dad, so this is what we did. Well, neighbor Joe probably has an entirely different set of variables than mom and dad or your spouse.
Well, and I think that's another really important thing. And we'll get back to this more when we talk more about the resources that Care Right offers. But, that's another thing that I always tell caregivers is like, I can't tell you, especially if I just have met you online, I can't give you advice because, what's going on in your family with your loved ones, their illnesses, their finances. So having someone that can come in and look at the big picture is so helpful. Speaking of caregivers, you have a name that you have given or assigned to caregivers. It is the name of your book, The Invisible Patient. I want to talk about this concept. Before we get deep into the book, I want to talk about what do you mean by invisible patient? Who is she or he? And how do they end up invisible?
It happens quickly. So the book came about because I worked with over 20,000 families in my career. And it's almost always the adult son or daughter that reaches out to me. And unfortunately, they're overwhelmed. They're burned out. They're like, look, mom or dad's needs exceed what I can physically do as a person, but I love them. And then I feel guilty. And then one of their questions that they almost always ask is, when is this going to end? Well, until you have a plan or until they pass away. If you're not going to put a plan in place, you're going to just end up burned out all the way until the end. And so it came about because I've had all these sons and daughters or spouse caregivers say, look, I love my loved one, but I am in over my head. And I wish there was a manual on what to do with mom and dad or what to do with my sick spouse. And so after like 5 years of the same request, because I'm just kind of known in the industry. So after about 5 years of just thousands of families going like, we need more resources. So I wrote a book called The Invisible Patient. And the invisible patient is you, the family caregiver, and you become invisible because everyone is always asking, hey, how's your mom doing? Or how's your dad doing? And you're like, well, they're doing fine, but it's to my detriment. Like I'm breaking my back. I'm going bankrupt. I'm losing my job. I'm not taking job promotion. My spouse is getting ready to leave me. I have my own health issues. So it's that caregiver snowball. It first starts out maybe feeling manageable and like, yeah, sure, I got this. I can do this. How long could this possibly go on? Well, taking care of someone with a broken hip, where it's a 6 to 8 to 10 week caregiving journey, is totally different than dementia or Parkinson's or ALS, where it can get really heavy really quick and for a longer period of time. And so the families were like, what do I do? And so I have a lot of goals. And one of my missions is leave no family caregiver behind. Every family caregiver, every dependent or vulnerable adult and senior deserves to have the best aging, caregiving, dementia, if it applies, and senior care and end of life journey. And so to reach the masses, because there are over 65 million family caregivers, and that's just who identifies as a caregiver. And that's just in the United States. There's over 250 million worldwide. But I can tell you, Jeanette, and you know this too, most of the people when they come to us, they don't even identify as a caregiver. And they're like, well, I'm just helping my mom and dad. That's what we were supposed to do. or that they're in crisis, even though they spent their whole consult crying and telling me how overwhelmed they are and how it's not safe or sustainable and how like caregiving has impacted their lives. And so that's why I wrote the book, to give them a down and dirty, here's stuff you need to know. I've got two different cohorts kind of readers, or two different kinds of readers. One is, one that will read it cover to cover, front to back, like a normal book. Others are just, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm in crisis. And so they'll just skip to like the crisis section and read the section of what they need to know. So there's redundancy in the book, but it's on purpose. And so it's just jam packed of checklists. What should you have in order? What is a living will? What should I know about placement companies? And how do I find a senior consultant? And what do I need to know about dementia? And how do I facilitate a family meeting? And so it's just kind of a do-it-yourself aging plan for those that are going to be like a Home Depot and try to do it on their own. It's a good conversation starter too for those who are like, look, I tried to have a conversation with mom and dad, but here I just got them the book, and now Annalee, take it from there. And here's the check. We'll pay you for whatever you need to do to get mom and dad on board.
So we'll talk more about the book in a second, but I want to stay here on the invisible patient, because one of the things that you talk about in the book, and we mentioned too, is when you write about it and about us, not it. We are the invisible patient. When you write about that, you write about the emotional, physical, and spiritual toll that caregiving is so well documented. We hear it all the time. We're scrolling on our TikTok or Instagram. People are talking about it. But a lot of times what's not talked about, and what I think is so sets you apart, is that there's so much self-love required to keep going without self-destructing. But yet self-love is something that, especially depending on how you were raised, that is something that we're not taught a lot of times, or we are taught that it's a bad thing. So why do we talk about caregiver burnout in theory, but do so little to prevent it or lessen the impact in reality?
Yeah, that's the age-old question. That'll probably be my next book. But, here's the thing is, in my generation, everything was like, just suck it up. You fall, you just get up and you keep going. Just culture changes. But also families change, right? Families back in the day, like I said, I'm 54. When I started out as a social worker in Iowa in care communities, families were large, 10, 15, 10, 12 kids, because it's a farming community, right? But so then they could like kind of divide and conquer the caregiving needs a little bit more because everybody lived locally together. But as families started moving away and got smaller, look how many solo agers there are. I'll probably be one of those. Like, look how many solo agers there are, or people who have just really small families, or they outlive their kids, who is going to be called at 3:00 in the morning and say, hey, I fell, or hey, I have a cardiology appointment next week, but I don't drive anymore. Who's going to get me there? And so there's been this whole shift of a lot of different things, right? Families are smaller. I wrote my thesis on this in 2006. So families are smaller, which means our pool of professional caregivers is smaller, which means our family caregiver pool is smaller. And mindset wise, we think we can manage caregiving until we can't. And then you start, you can just feel it working up and bubbling up in you, but most of us suck it up and just ignore it. Well, you can only ignore it until now you ground all your teeth off, or you're not sleeping, or you gain 30 pounds, or you lost 30 pounds.
Right. Well, and that brings me to my next point, which is what I want to go into next, which is let's go deeper on burnout, because you just started mentioning some of the telltale signs. But I think a lot of people listening don't really know that they're burned out. I think you talked about that a second ago, where you were like, yep, they're sobbing. They're like, no, I'm fine. So they just think they're exhausted, or worse, that they just stink at being a caregiver. That's the way I felt. Like, I just thought, like, when I started therapy, when I was experiencing my extreme burnout, I thought I was experiencing burnout because I just wasn't organized well enough, and I just wasn't doing it right. So I thought, oh, I'll go to a therapist. I went to a social worker, licensed mental health professional, and I'm like, help me be a better caregiver. And they were like, honey, I mean, yes, but that's not what we're really going to talk about. So I want to give people a little bit of more detail about what does caregiver burnout actually look like? What are some signs that somebody's crossed over from just like, stressful, normal stress that happens in every family, to something that's genuinely dangerous for themselves. Can you talk us through that a little bit?
Absolutely becomes very dangerous, and so it starts out subtle, because I call it the caregiver snowball. They're like, oh, I can manage this. Well, you can until you can't. Well, what this looks like, and there's all these different layers and categories of caregiver burnout, right? Like people like spouses or adult kids who are having to step away from work for a period of time because they have to be on hold with the long-term care insurance company for 7 hours because they kept getting rerouted. There's the financial caregiving piece where they have to confer with a financial planner, provided they even know who the financial planner is. So there's the insurance and the financial piece, and like, okay, well, that's great. Mom has a financial power of attorney in place, but like, where are her banks? I'm not listed on any of them. Like, who's your financial planner? That's why I developed the grab and go binder, because like nobody knows anything. So there's that financial piece, and that alone can be like, any of these categories alone can get overwhelming too quickly and very quickly. And so just the financial piece of every time you get that call and you live in New York and dad fell and he lives in Arizona and you have to be there tomorrow because he's in the hospital again and he's confused and the doctor's like, we don't know what to do with him. That's not $69 on Frontier. That's like $1,200. So for a one-way ticket. And that's not including stepping away from your business or from your work. So that financial burnout component. And then if your spouse is like, hey, look, I love you, and I love your parents, but like, you got to figure something out because you're not present in our relationship. You keep missing our kids, like sporting events or whatever, canceling vacations. So that bleeds into then the relationships with your people at home. And eventually, if you don't put a plan in place, you're going to resent your siblings because everybody assumes that the siblings will help out. Well, they don't. They're like, oh, you're doing great. And you're like, oh, wow, I can't do this anymore. It's a full-time job. Caregiving is a full-time job. And then it bleeds into your career as far as like, you can only play the caregiver card so long before your employer or your colleagues are like, look, I can't cover for you, or I'm done taking care of your caseload or whatever while you're gone because dad fell again. And then so it just continually bleeds into things. And that's the caregiver snowball. And then that's not including when you have to start missing work or taking time away or taking FMLA, Family and Medical Leave Act, because now mom's disease has progressed to the point where you just don't feel comfortable with her being by herself. And so you're having to like drive or fly back and forth every time. Or you're like, I can't keep this up because I just shelled out $8,000 in airfare this month going back and forth. So maybe I'll just move mom in with me, because you don't realize, oh, I guess my house isn't senior safe. Like we see this in Florida and the hurricane states all the time. Like the kids are like, oh, mom and dad, evacuate, come up north to us. Well, okay, that's great if they do, but your house isn't senior safe. You got stairs, or dad has dementia and he keeps wandering out because he's confused in where he is. Or you realize, oh my gosh, I love mom and dad, but I don't want them living with me. And then because you didn't put any boundaries in place, you didn't say, well, look, you can, and this is what I encourage families to do. If you're going to make that leap of, hey, let's just move in together. Okay, so
yeah, there has to be some boundaries, because
who's going to pay for everything? Like, are you expected to take off work, or how are you going to get compensated if you have to take Tuesday off because dad has 3 doctor's appointments and you're trying to stack doctor's appointments?
Well, and like even just mentioning like the whole hurricane thing, right? Like, come stay with us or whatever. Sometimes caregiving happens because of something like that. Come stay with me while your hip gets better. Come stay with me during the hurricane. Then they get there and you're like, oh no.
And the kids are blindsided.
Because you don't, that's the only time you spent, 48 hours or whatever. And then you're seeing all these symptoms and things that you didn't notice at first. So to your point, all of this stuff kind of snowballs on each other. And I love how you broke it down too. Like any one of those pieces can cause burnout. But what happens is one explodes into the next, or rolls into the next. In my case, I felt like it was constantly blowing up.
There are all these little bombs going off all the time. And then, adult kids, this is what I see, is adult kids assume that their parents are doing better than they actually are. So then when they come visit at holidays, they're like, holy smokes, dad didn't recognize me, or the house smells, or mom was she just unkempt, or there's 6 months of mail piled up. Well, so that means probably their bills didn't get paid, or they're not taking their medicines. And so kids are always blindsided, and they're like, Annalee, we didn't realize until we got there or we moved mom and dad in with us that they didn't know how to take their meds on, they don't know what their medications are, and they're double taking them or not taking them, or dad's taking mom's, and like all this stuff, just kids get a rude awakening very quickly.
Well, and another thing that starts to happen is with all of these things snowballing together and colliding is that guilt starts rising. So like in the example you just gave, you are realizing something about your parents and you're like, what kind of daughter am I that I didn't realize that my parents weren't doing as good as they are? You have guilt, or let's say you're in the middle of it already as a caregiver and you are emotionally exhausted, but your siblings keep telling you you're doing a great job, and you feel guilty because you don't want to, put that on them, but also you do need some help. And so there's all this guilt. Where do you see guilt coming into the burnout picture? And
I know it totally is, because it's not only guilt about, oh my gosh, I'm not doing enough for my care recipient, whether it's mom, dad, brother with special needs, whatever. But then it's guilt to your family at home that you're like, oh, we were supposed to be on vacation, or I promised my husband that I would be available and we'd do whatever this weekend. And here I am driving to wherever mom lives. And so it's guilt all across the board. It's not just in one little tiny category. It's guilt everywhere. Or like if you have this like big job, or even if you don't have this big job, but what if you're in sales and you're going to get fired if you don't hit your sales targets? And you're like, hey, I couldn't help it. I had to take 2 weeks off because mom had a stroke and dad, I had to take care of dad, So guilt about everything, like where am I in my career? Guilt at home, guilt because what if you are one of 4 kids and everybody just assumes, well, because you're a nurse or you're a social worker or you're in healthcare, well, that just makes sense that you handle all things mom.
Or you already did caregiving for another family member and you're so great at it.
And so now all you did was stack caregiving on top of caregiving. And so some of the caregivers, they have up to 6, because some of the sons or daughters, they're taking care of, because we have so many blended families, because that's just assuming that you and your parents actually get along. Now we've got blended families, or maybe mom was a terrible mother and now you're like having to take care of her and you're like, look, I'm not cut out for that. I'm not cut out for that. Or like, and I'll just use engineers as an example, because I work with a lot of engineers. I love engineers because they're very risk averse. So that I always can get them to like, yes, let's do an aging plan because they're like, because, not everybody's wired to be a caregiver.
Right. Well, and we're going to get to aging plan next, but there's something we have got to talk about before we say goodbye to burnout, because you say something that I think is very profound. And I realized this in my own caregiving journey, which was a couple different things that you've said already. I want to hit on, and then I'm going to ask this question. But one of the things that you talked about was the guilt isn't just about like how good of a caregiver you are. Like for me, every time I said no to my mom, I felt guilty for saying no, but I had to say no to her so that I could say yes to my children, or yes to my husband, or yes to my job. And so what I realized was every no to someone, or, was, if I said no to my mom, so I could say yes to my kids, I was still saying no to my mom, and then that would switch. So what I also realized about myself was I was not willing to say no to anybody else but myself. So I would try to do it all for my kids, try to do it all for my mom, try to do it all for my work, try to do it, be the best wife I could, take care of the house, blah, blah, blah. And I was not saying no enough in those circumstances necessarily, but I was saying no to myself. Or if I said yes to myself, that meant I had to say no to somebody else. And that guilt was built on top. So I want you to talk about, you say saying no is an act of love, not abandonment.
Yeah. Yes. Because, and this too, because you do coaching and consulting, but, we join in our families' journeys wherever they are. And a lot of my clients, because it's the kids that seek us out, because they are the mom and dad's assisted living or memory care unit. But these kids also have their own, like they have special needs children at home, and they're burned out just from that, if they have significant special needs. And now dad had a stroke, and they're like, the poor mom or dad, they're like, the adult kids are like, I don't have anything left in me. My own family takes all that I have, my own family and my career. So it's really important to think about, how far are you going to go into this caregiving journey? Like, what are you willing to sacrifice career-wise, finances, spouse, marriage, relationships, all across the board with siblings or the care recipient? How much money are you willing to spend? Like, what is your threshold? What's your runway of energy that you have? What if you have cancer or you're in breast cancer treatment? Or what if you're like a lot of us middle-aged women, we're going through menopause. And so our bodies and hormones are like totally out of whack. And here we are trying to take care of a loved one who's dependent and manage a career, manage a business. So, how far are you willing to go? And really stepping back and saying, stepping back is easier said than done. You need to be able to step back so that you can get clarity, because that's the problem. So many of us end up in survival mode that you're just trying to get through this hour or this day or this afternoon, trying to juggle everything. And so what is your threshold? And it's okay if it's a small threshold.
Right. I talk about it when I talk about it, I talk about it in terms of capacity, but basically we're saying the same thing. Know your limits. And hello, eldest daughters, perfect daughters. Hello, we do have limits. So we have to acknowledge that first. And that's going to mean that we're going to be saying no at some point to someone. And in order to really to have it not blindside us, to be able to work through some of that guilt, perhaps maybe therapies might be something that that actually really helped me, was getting into therapy before so that I could learn how to say no to my mom, things like that. But so knowing your limits is about asking those questions, to your point that you just said, before.
But unfortunately, because we're in survival mode, just like, oh, dad has 2 appointments this week, mom has 3, and then if you've got your stray aunt, because they're like, oh, well, you can be power of attorney for her too. Well, this isn't Thanksgiving. There's not always room for one more, right? Like one person, one aging loved one or one ill spouse can be a full-time job with care coordination, talking to the financial team, all that kind of stuff.
My mom had like 15 doctors at least.
Every part has an ologist. And so, like even with my mom, my mom and dad lived here in Florida with me since 2017. One of the reasons I went virtual in 2011 when I started Care Right was because my own mom had early onset dementia. And I knew that I couldn't drive from Milwaukee to Iowa every weekend. It just wasn't sustainable. So that in the market required virtual consultancy. But I realized within like 12 trips that I'm like, I can't do this. Like in the winter when it's like 8 hours because of a blizzard. And so thinking about these things before, but the problem is that most of us, we get thrust into caregiving and we think we're superhuman and we're not used to saying no, especially women. We're not used to saying no. And we're trying to be everyone's everything. And you will collapse, and this will destroy every aspect of your life,
your career, your relationships, your
everything. And so you've got to be thinking about that, preferably before you get burned out and have your own health issues or financial issues.
So let's dive into it. This is what we're going to do. The aging plan. This is what I think this is where we're going. This is something that, like you mentioned, having a plan, talking about these things, thinking about these things for your loved one and also for yourself is so, so important. And this is, because to your point, a lot of what you see is when somebody's already in crisis. So if we can start to think about these things and have a plan in place and share it with people so they know that we have one, that is so important. So I want you to talk about what an aging plan is and why do families resist making one until they're in a crisis. You kind of already hit on that. So, we can move on from that if you want to, but what is an aging plan? What do we need?
Yeah, an aging plan is, my aging plan is where I facilitate the family meetings, because you can't expect a consumer to put their own plan in place if they think Medicare and Medicaid are the same program, or if they think assisted living and nursing homes are you can't make informed decisions if you're making decisions off of wrong information. So this way we start from scratch. Everybody round robin on Zoom. Used to be Skype, but round robin on Zoom. What's working well? What's not working well? What's in place now? What is not in place? What are the goals? Mom and dad always have the same 2 goals. I want to age in place at home and I don't want to be a burden on my kids. But yet it's the kids reaching out to us for an aging plan, or now it's crisis, right? Kids' goal, same thing, almost across the board. Want their parents to be safe, happy, have the best quality of life and the best quality of care possible. Only way to accomplish those goals is a plan. So we facilitate family meetings. Unfortunately, because families don't come to us until crisis, 92% of them come to us in crisis. And so they're onboarded in crisis. 85% of those families, I'm doing family mediation while I'm now putting their crisis plan in place, because they're like, well, what's home care? What can home care do? And they're blown away about how much home care costs. You can tell that they've gone to maybe some seminars or podcasts where they heard this buzzwords, aging in place at home. Well, yeah, that's what we want to do. Well, okay, so mom and dad have been like 30 grand per person, like per companion, to because aging in place at home, just well, I got it half body. Meaning it's not free, and it's not like, when you say aging in place at home, you got to fast forward, because none of us get healthier, more able-bodied, more cognizant as we age. So obviously when people say age in place at home, they want to stay there until they die. Well, very few people go from up walking around feeding themselves to like dead, right? There's usually a progression. And so you should expect that care is going to be needed at home, and it's going to be expensive. One caregiver can cost $30,000, depending on where you live, 30 grand for just one caregiver 24/7. Well, if you have two aging parents, or like my dad, he's 6'4", when he had his stroke, and my mom, dementia, short attention span, had her days and nights confused. You can't hire one caregiver to manage that. It's two. So that's over 60 grand. And so people throw out these, aging in place at home. So we educate families. I'm just educating them on all of these things that they probably heard about or haven't heard about yet, but need to consider. Just like, well, I made mom the promise, so it's also therapy while I'm doing the family meeting. Well, I made mom the promise. Well, here we are having to make a decision about moving her into a care facility. And so it's helping them understand the lay of the land in senior care. A lot of times they don't even think about these care facilities. A lot of them are cited for abuse and neglect, or they're short staffed, or maybe mom lives in rural Wisconsin and there isn't a memory care facility there, or it's a male only care facility and, memory care, and she needs memory care and she's a female. And so there's all these nuances that families don't think about. And that's why we do an aging plan, so people can understand what are the safety triggers on when to bring in care. Because that's one of the top 5 questions adult kids always have on their consults. Well, how do we know what care mom needs, when to bring it in, and how to move forward with that and take action? Because she's like, no, you have to take care of me, as you owe that to me, right? And so it's working through all of that, and then putting in actual, like, okay, if you want to age in place at home, here's different technology solutions, here's home care, and here's what care is like in your area, and here's long-term care communities, and here's what their waiting lists are. These allow cameras. This one you have to have $4 million in net worth to be able to financially qualify. So it's very robust. It's very comprehensive. And then we also go into like, what do you have in place? A lot of them, most of my families are in the dementia journey, and it never occurred to them to update the power of attorney. So here we have demented mom who's sundowning, still being the decision maker for dad, because it never occurred to the family to be like, hey, do we have documents in order, and are they up to date?
Or what the documents are at all.
Yeah, that's why we've got the grab and go binder.
Well, so I wanted to just go through some of the tools that you have so many things on your website, but the grab and go binder does give you a list of what are these different things, what do they mean, and where to go get them.
Well, and it's robust because there isn't anything else like and I built that in 2011 because I had all these decades ahead of that of people not understand what's in order. So there's a heading for business succession plan. So what's the plan if dad's a business owner? Who's going to carry the baton?
So it's not just get power of attorney, get medical surrogate, it's very
insurance, it's legal documents, it's accounts, password, online assets, your Marriott points. Maybe you could transfer the Marriott points if your kids are having to fly back and forth every other week, maybe, and you have Marriott points, why not just gift them to them? And it's about your pets. There's a pet emergency section, because what are you going to do with Floppy if mom's in the hospital and special needs? Because I said a lot of my clients, they have special needs, their kids are special needs. And so it's like, what's the special needs section? So it's not just for emergency preparedness, isn't just for when you get old. I'm 54, but 4 days after my 40th birthday, I had just returned from Shenzhen in Beijing, China, from an international engagement on all of this. And lo and behold, I was in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, helping an 82-year-old gentleman cross the street because he looked like he was struggling. I'm like, 911. He's like, no, I just need to get across the street. And my wife is in the car over there, and then she's going to take me home. And I'm like, okay, fine. Well, he's telling me about all of his health issues, and all of a sudden he yells as we're as we're in the crosswalk. And all of a sudden he yells, "Watch out." And the next thing I know, I'm getting up off the street. I had a backpack as a purse. Long story short, I got hit by a school bus driver. She was distracted by the kids in the bus. And so she blew through a four-corner stop. She was looking inside the mirror, the inside mirror, instead of through the windshield. And she didn't apply she told the police this on the police report. I didn't see her. I didn't apply the brakes until I saw her face break the headlight of the school bus. And so I had my own emergency, right? But because I practice what I preach, I already have an aging plan. I already had my grab and go binder. And what happens is people might get their documents in order and their business succession plan and all that, but they don't tell anybody, right? And so my family, because I'm a solo ager, my siblings are my power of attorney for health and finance and my business succession plan. And so they're sick to death of me always saying, okay, I'm a do not resuscitate. I'm allergic to penicillin. Here's my doctors and here's like my roster of my employees, because they did have to notify my clients. They did have to notify my employees. And so you have to be prepared. There's no age of when you have to do this. You have to do it right now. Because trust me, I didn't wake up on 4 days after my 40th birthday and think, I think I'll get hit by a school bus and be laid up for a year and have to have multiple facial reconstruction surgeries and internal bleeding to heal. Yep. And then you get thrust into caregiving on top of that. So life gets messy quick.
Yeah. And that's a good point. So when we're talking about this aging plan, a lot of us, a lot of people listening are thinking like, oh yeah, I really need to get my parents to do this. But to your point, we also need to be doing this, right? So this is something my husband and I have definitely talked about for years, because one thing my mom did do, there were many, many, many things that we did not plan for appropriately. But I will say I did have my binder of all of the stuff that she needed. So when the time came for me to show power of attorney, show medical surrogate, show stuff about Medicaid, all of those, I did have that. And it was very, very helpful. But to your point, the more I dealt with her, the more I kept thinking, I don't want my kids to not know what to do, nor do I want them to have to do everything like so. So, having a plan and clarifying it and discussing it. And I think too, the more times you talk about it, the easier it gets, because, like even driving around with my young adult children now, I will be able to say to them without it being as weird as it used to be. I don't know. They may still think it's weird. Doesn't feel as weird to me, but, I'll talk to them about something I want, or, we'll be talking about something that happened with my, their grandmother who passed away a year ago. And I'll say, and so if that ever happened to me, this is what I would want. And so it's a very easy transition for me now. So I think the more times you talk about it as well, whether it be with your children or, to your point, to your siblings, it gets easier.
Well, one thing about that though, because if people even did say, hey, here's my power of attorney, you're it, but they just give them the documents. That's provided they even have the documents in order, but they'll just be like, okay, they'll email their kids, or as an example, well, here's the power of attorney documents. Okay, but you didn't train them on what do you do? What are your wishes? Like what bank do you go to? Who's your financial planner? What bills do you have on auto pay? What bills come out of which account? Like they do the surface stuff, but you got to like dig deeper, right? That's why we do the aging plan and an ongoing care package services, so that we make sure everyone and everything is buttoned up until that person passes away. So usually families stay on our services all the way through end of life, because it's just a bumpy road and they're like, oh my gosh, dad's in the hospital again. There's always something. And so having those family meetings often about what are your wishes for end of life and what the finances, because then it's become muscle memory and it feels more comfortable, because then when that crisis happens, you're not like, oh my gosh, mom told me this one time 12 years ago when we had a conversation about it, but what did she say? I don't remember.
I can testify to that. And I know I've talked about it before on the podcast, but my mom drilled into my head exactly what she wanted. She knew there would be times where she would be in a crisis, that she would have to be, potentially intubated, all of these types of things. So I remember one time she went in for what was supposed to be like every surgery was major with her because she had a disease, this illness. However, it was a relatively minor procedure that she was having. And we were such frequent flyers at the hospital that they went ahead and like let me into her, what was, the room they were going to take her into. So I was like setting up her stuff and decorating like I always did. And her surgeon, her doctor who also did the procedure came in and he said, "Hey, she did great. No big whoop, but we did have to put her in ICU. So I'm going to, take you up there." And I was like, "Okay, fine." This was a routine situation for us. But when I got up there, they were icing her down in an ice bucket. She had a fever of 105. She was intubated. Her breathing was really lowered. And then that's when the ICU doctor came in and he was telling me this and that and this and that. And he was like, "You can go home. We'll call you if you need anything." And I looked at him and I said, "Listen, I know exactly what I'm supposed to be doing right now. And I can promise you, my mom does not want me to go home." And I told him, I was like, "My mom has told me since I was 8 years old to not leave her if she's in a situation like this. I don't have to stay in this room if that's, not the right thing. You can put me in the waiting room, but I'm not going anywhere." And I remember clicking in my brain. I was like, "Oh, I am so happy. I know exactly what my mom wants." And then there was other times that she was intubated and she was intubated for a long time. And so they started talking about all of the different things. And I said, "Listen, I know that this is your standard thing that you have to tell everybody, but my mom made it very clear to me she wanted to be intubated. So I may not want that for myself, but she made it very clear to me." And that even as hard of the time that was, and like she's, potentially not going to make it, I felt so relaxed and comfortable because I knew I was doing what she wanted. It made all of the difference in the world, honestly.
It absolutely does. And I'm not an attorney. I'm a social worker and a family meeting facilitator and a family mediator. And so for those listening who are like, "Oh, maybe we need to readdress our power of attorney or get them," make sure that you appoint someone that you are confident, because you've had conversations with them, that they'll actually follow through with what your wishes are. Or like if your daughter is a gambler and has all this financial issues, you probably don't want her to be your financial power of attorney, right? So like be selective and be mindful. And it for the solo agers out there, because I work with a lot of solo agers too, they're like, "Well, I don't even have anybody. I don't have kids. I don't have, now is the time to really start developing relationships and friendships, because there's probably a lot of other solo agers around you that maybe you can be each other's power of attorney once you become more, relationship based and know each other and trust each other. Because that's one of the biggest problems. Because if you don't have these documents in order and you lose capacity, a stroke, a fall, and you bump your head, guess what? It's thousands of dollars for emergency guardianship and conservatorship, because you have to go to court and then a judge appoints who's going to be your decision maker, and you have to pay for that. So again, I'm not an attorney. I'm just trying to help families be like this. These are the layers of nuances that I talk about in an aging plan. It's that robust.
So important. And thanks for clarifying that. And your website, for those of you who are listening and watching, I'm going to have all of this stuff in the description and the show notes. So you'll be able to access her website, learn more about all of that. With crisis management, we've been talking about this crisis management. I just want to get one little bit of encouragement for you. What does crisis management look like? How is it different than what you're experiencing? Although I feel like a lot of what you've been describing is people coming to you in crisis. So is it too late? If I'm in crisis already, is it too late?
And this is because I get asked that a lot. It's because it's never too late. It's just that if you choose to wait, because here's the thing. What I see is families in denial. "Oh, mom's doing okay," or, "Well, she just got the diagnosis of dementia. She's okay for a while yet." Well, they are until they aren't. And then what? Or they're taking care of a disease that they know nothing about. There's all sorts of free information, Parkinson's Association, MS, ALS, Alzheimer's Association. But again, I've yet to work with a family who's actually leveraged all of this information and resources at their fingertips that is free. And so that's why the aging plan is like involved, because I have to educate them on every single thing that they're going through. It's never too late. It's just that if you choose to wait until you're in crisis, you and your loved one are not going to be getting along. Your siblings and you are not going to get along. And it's going to be very expensive, because if that's when you find out that there was no power of attorney in place and now you have to shell out 25 grand, or someone has to shell out 25 grand for guardianship, or that's when you realize that because you're learning as you go that, oh, home care, mom wanted to go home with 24/7 home care because she didn't want to go to a nursing home or a rehab center. Well, that's 30 grand a month. So those are the challenges I see. Is it's never too late. It's just, if you want your parents and yourself and your family to have the best possible outcomes, we have to plan ahead. They'll always have options, but it's not going to be ideal options, because guess what? If your parents aren't on already waiting lists, or your spouse who's sick isn't already on waiting lists in different care communities, like where you've paid a deposit and actually on the waiting list, not that you got this card in the mail and you went to a luncheon, that does not mean that you're on the waiting list. And so it's just, if you don't have a plan, your loved one will end up in whatever care facility has an open bed. And I promise you, it's not going to be a good fit. I promise you're going to feel terrible. If you feel guilty now, you're going to feel even worse if you choose to wait until there's a crisis. Now, usually what happens is kids, because they're like, girl, you're preaching to the choir. We know mom and dad aren't doing well. We know they're not safe, but we tried to have these conversations. How do we get mom and dad to be like on board with this? Because the kids are like, yeah, whatever it's going to cost, let's do this. And so that's why that first session is how we get mom and dad on board. For those that are just listening, you can, this is some framework to maybe take home and like noodle some more, is speak from the heart. Mom and dad, we love you, or whomever the care recipient is. Mom and dad, we love you, but we're in uncharted territory here. And what we're doing is not safe or sustainable for any of us. We know Annalee and Care Right. This is what they do, and this is how they can help us. They offer a complimentary consult. I did it. I liked what she had to say, and we're going to do this aging plan. You can either participate in your own aging plan, or if you don't want to or don't feel comfortable to, then you're giving me and my siblings consent to just make the decisions on your behalf. So every parent who doesn't have dementia is like, you're not making my decisions. And so from the heart, we don't know what we're doing. We're in uncharted territory. Or if it's a business owner, like your parent's a business owner, you can say, well, mom and dad, just like you put a business succession plan in place, or just like you have long-term care insurance, or just like you work with a financial advisor to put a financial plan, this is an aging plan. If your goal is to not be a burden on us kids, we need to do this now while you can still participate in the plan and while we're still getting along. Did I already mention 85% of my families, I'm doing family mediation? And I can tell you that family meetings of a family who's a proactive planner, where they're like, hey, we're just starting to see the writing on the wall with mom or dad, or mom and dad starting to see the writing on the wall, and they're trying to have the family meeting with their kids, but the kids are like, no, you're fine, because the kids are in denial. That's why you need that neutral third party family meeting facilitator who actually knows dementia and actually knows these care facilities and knows the landscape of senior care and how to navigate around in it.
Well, and I think it's important too. Like, I definitely saw this when we started using palliative care and hospice care, is there are just some things that someone that's outside of the situation can say more clearly, and not in a mean way or not in an uncaring way, but just some things that are easier said by a third party. And so I can definitely see that, how that would help, especially like you said, there's families that are getting along great now, but not after there's this cluster of caregiving crises one after the other. Or maybe there are some family dynamics. I grew up in the 70s and 80s. We all learned, dysfunctional family wasn't a thing until the late 80s. And then we found out we all had dysfunctional families. But so there's a level of dysfunction in families, and having a third party come in and just say the fact, like, this is just the facts. This is just the way it is, without that emotional connection, is very helpful and can cut through a lot of that, I think, that we carry, of our family drama that we carry.
And we've got, like I said, just the world is what it is. And we've got a lot of blended families that we work with, where maybe mom and dad got married. Ethel and Marvin got married in their 70s and 80s. And the kids never really even knew each other. Like both sets of kids never even really met or have a relationship. Well, guess what? Now Marvin had a stroke or Ethel had Alzheimer's. And so now they're like having to get get acquainted with each other. And now they're like at each other because they're like, well, I don't want my mom taking care of your dad because she's going to get hurt or whatever.
So we've already talked about your book, but I want to just circle back to it really quickly. You wrote this based on 28 years of being involved from, and then, as a child, you're watching stuff happen with your family, you're enduring your own family crises while your parents are also trying to caregive. Plus you have all of this experience with caregivers. You wrote the book Invisible Patient just for caregivers. You did mention also that sometimes caregivers buy it and give it to their family. And so that can work too. Beyond the book, what do you want most caregivers to know? What is something that they can start with right now? What would you recommend that they start with right now?
Yeah. So what I'm not going to say is self-care, because any of us that have been caregivers, we hate that. That's just one tip. Like, don't say, well, you have to take care of yourself, because all of us are like, yeah, when? So one thing is, and self-care means different things to different people, right? For me, self-care, I'm an introvert, I'm a homebody. So for me, self-care is just leave me alone. Let me out in my garden for 2 hours and let me mulch and let me do my thing. So find what it is that works for you. Step back. And this is hard, but step back so that you actually have mental clarity and say, what is my capacity? What's my bandwidth? What can I reasonably do so that I don't hate you as the care recipient, right? So one thing is just have some self-awareness, journal, whatever it is going to take for you to just say, okay, look, I can do caregiving until this happens, or until I have to shell out $5,000 of my own money. That's my financial limit. Or if I have to cancel a vacation, like what are your limits? And then sticking to them. And yes, if mom's going to fall, she's going to fall, right? But that's why we had that. Again, it all boils down to an aging plan. If you're going to be willy-nilly about this, you're going to have willy-nilly outcomes. And so you shouldn't be surprised when things go sideways. I mean, that's just dumb to think that it's going to go well without a plan. And so, I mean, we plan for everything in our life. Why wouldn't we plan for the end of life and our own families and our own well-being? So think about, what do I want to keep on my caregiver plate? What do I need to take off my caregiver plate for my own health, my own sanity, my own mental well-being? That's why it's a bench. The invisible patient, you always feel, every caregiver I've ever talked to, myself included, we feel lonely and isolated. And it's a lonely journey if you don't have enough support systems in place in your social circle or in your circle at home, your sibling circle. If you even have siblings, if you're an only child, you're like, yeah, what am I supposed to do about that? That's a whole nother podcast. It's a lonely journey. And my goal is that if we can help a handful of family caregivers not get to their breaking point, because we're talking about this now. And if you have the emotional bandwidth to just absorb this and step back, just take an hour and just think about, okay, what can I do that's not going to hurt me? What serves you and what does not serve you?
That's right. We're going to have you back because this was such a great conversation. Annalee, where can listeners find you, the book, everything CareRight has to offer? I love your website. It's very clear. There's a ton of resources on it. Where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can go through the website, carerightinc.com. You can set up a free 30-minute consult right from the CareRight Inc. homepage. If you're a financial planner, there's like other services. So there's like a financial planning tab on there too for financial planners. Or you can find me on LinkedIn, just under Annalee Kruger on LinkedIn. And so message me there if you have questions, but I have checklists already on my website, on the CareRight Inc. website, but I have checklists for caregiver burden. What does that look like? How to tour care facilities, how to be a bold advocate. What is living versus skilled nursing? So my goal is to always educate people, but it's also in my book, which you can find on Amazon.
Annalee, thank you for the work you do, for the tools that you give us, and for the reminder that caregivers are not invisible and they deserve care too. If this conversation gave you something that you needed today, a name for what you're carrying, a first step, or just the knowledge that you're not alone in this, please share it with a caregiver in your life. the one who is doing everything for everyone, is running low on themselves, send this to them. It might be the most useful thing you do for them this week. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find more resources at JeanetteYates.com, and be sure to check the description for all of Annalee's links and how to get in touch with her. Until next time, feel good, not guilty.